Our life can be a form of worship. Everything you do can be a form of worship if you plan for that. If you don't plan for that, well, we're going to talk about that today. Okay, so one of the points that was made earlier in the series that I found very compelling was this idea that we're all built to worship. It was said that no matter where you go in the world, you're going to find people there worshiping something or someone. It's just a matter of what it is or who it is. This stuck in my mind, and actually God's been really, really, really good to me this last week. He's really made my week so full of a lot of really teachable experiences. And, you know, sometimes you see glorious things in the most mundane places. But my dishwasher didn't work. So I'm trying to fix my dishwasher. And I don't know if you've ever fixed a dishwasher, but it's awful. It's really gross. You can't fit anywhere that the stuff for the dishwasher is. You need help. You don't want help because it's gross, but it's there. So my brother was helping me. We were trying to get the hose that connects the dishwasher to the drain off. And it's like way in the back of the cabinet. It's up behind the sink. You have to like lay on your back and go over your head with a screwdriver in the dark. Hold one hand holds the hose, the other hand holds the screwdriver. It's just terrible. So he was helping me, and he came out from under the sink, and he's like, you know, the screwdriver we have, it's too narrow, doesn't fit. It keeps slipping out. So I go and I grab another screwdriver, but while I was over there grabbing a screwdriver, he grabbed a butter knife, which, if anybody here is like me, that was my toolkit. When I was a kid, I took everything in our house apart with a butter knife. It was my pry bar, my screwdriver. I even hammered nails in with it sometimes. It was just like my multi-tool. It was perfect. It was perfect. I used it for everything. I could do amazing things with a butter knife. The problem is that when you use a butter knife as a tool, you end up with a butter knife that is dented and mangled and torn up. It's missing pieces. It's really not good for much at that point. That's what brought to mind this principle here. Wherever you go, you find somebody worshiping. But where you find people using their worship for the wrong things and pointed at the wrong stuff, then they look just like that butter knife. They're all dented and torn up. They're missing pieces. They're not right. They're damaged. A lot of people understand what I'm talking about here, I know. And that's what makes it so important to understand what the purpose and proper way of worship really is. Because, you know, we're saving ourselves, really. So we're going to get deeper into this topic today, worship. Today's message is entitled Preparation for Worship. Okay, we're starting in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verses 1 through 7. This is in the Message version. It starts off with huge bold letters that say, God is in charge, not you. Watch your step when you enter God's house. Enter to learn. That's far better than mindlessly offering sacrifices, doing more harm than good. Don't shoot off your mouth or speak before you think. Don't be too quick to tell God what you think he wants to hear. God is in charge, not you. The less you speak, the better. Overwork makes for restless sleep. Overtalk shows you up as a fool. When you tell God you'll do something, do it now. God takes no pleasure in foolish gabble. Vow it and then do it. Far better not to vow in the first place than to vow and not pay. Don't let your mouth make a total sinner of you. When called to account, you won't get by with, sorry, I didn't mean it. Why risk provoking God to angry retaliation? But against all illusion and fantasy and empty talk, there is always this rock foundation: fear God. There's a lot of good stuff there. It's super blunt, right? It's like, sorry, God. But what I want to focus on first is the end of that, because I find it to be no small coincidence that in this passage here, talking about how we should prepare for worship, that the last sentence also happens to be what Proverbs 1:7 says is the beginning of wisdom, the fear of the Lord. Okay, the beginning of our worship and the beginning of our wisdom, the beginning of our life as a Christian begins with fearing the Lord. Remember to whom you are speaking. God's a lot of things. He's a lot of things to us. He's, of course, our friend. He's our Savior. He's our God. He's our Creator. But above all things, He's God. We can't let the fact that He's God get lost in the shuffle. We can't, I will. All right. Okay. So again, though, we go back, taking a couple looks at some of these things. Watching your step. Watch what you say. You can't be foolish in front of the king. Anybody who's ever seen or read a book about king anywhere, any king, nobody walks into the king's court running their mouth, knocking things over, acting like a fool. No one tells the king, I'm going to go ahead and handle that for you, and then just doesn't. That's the guy that gets his head chopped off. This is God, king above all kings, not just king. We can't treat him like he's, our buddy from the street. Like it doesn't matter the promises we make to him, the things that we say to him. R.C. Sproul said, God is serious about how we worship him, and we must be serious about it too. 1 Chronicles 16:30 says God is serious business. Take him seriously. He put the earth in place, and it's not moving. It's kind of hard to imagine sometimes the things that we've done. We run to God in shame, never thinking about who he is. The things that we say to him, the things that we get mad at him for not doing, the things that we want to throw a fit about. How come they're like that and I'm like this? What's that about, God? As if he has any obligation to explain. Let me give you an example here of what it's like when somebody brings worship unprepared. We're going to look at Genesis chapter 4. This is the story of Cain and Abel. Okay, everybody knows the story. I'll kind of paraphrase it for you. Cain and Abel are two brothers. They both bring an offering to the Lord. Cain brings a grain offering, crops. And Abel brings livestock. They call it sometimes a blood offering. It was a live animal. The Lord rejected Cain's offering and accepted Abel's. Now, there's some different opinions amongst various Bible scholars and so forth about why that was exactly. Some say that it was because it was a grain offering and atonement offerings required blood. So it was the wrong thing. It was inappropriate. Some say that it was because it wasn't a first fruits offering, that he brought him just the scraps and the throwaway stuff, the stuff that he wasn't going to use anyway, stuff with no value. Some people say that it was his heart, that he had a wrong heart. He came to bring this offering to God with that idea that this is a favor he was doing. This was something God wanted, and God would just take just anything. No big deal. This is just going to sit, it's an offering, right? God doesn't use it. We're going to burn it, or we're going to leave it by the, in the place of worship. We're not doing it. It doesn't matter. You know what I mean? He'll accept it. It's no big deal. In all three cases, the fact is it was a worship brought unprepared. He was unprepared to do the right thing. He didn't care about what the right thing was. He didn't care about to whom he brought this worship. He didn't care. He didn't care enough to prepare. Didn't care enough to plan. It wasn't a priority to him. Because that's why we plan for stuff, right? That's why we prepare. Because we refuse to let whatever it is we're doing just fall to chance. We insist that it's right, or as best to, or close to right as we can get it. That's why we plan for things like our future. We plan for things like our retirement, like our education, because we don't want to just hope for the best. We don't stop working one day and then check the bank account and see how we're going to be able to live for the rest of our life. We plan that because we can't just be homeless in our old age. We can't just hope that we get a great job. Those are things that don't just happen. You have to prepare for them. So why not prepare for worship to a God that's supposed to take us from the end of our life through to eternity? You know, we focus on the small parts. We prepare for the small parts. We don't prepare for the big parts. We neglect that because we feel like God's just going to take care of that. You know, we don't have to worry about that till we're dead. You ever heard anybody say that? I think I believe in God. Maybe. I'll worry about it when I'm dead. It's not the time. Not the time. Believe me. Too late. Oops. It's like that attitude that you get like when your friend asks you to help them move. You know what I mean? And you really don't want to, and you know you don't want to, but you say yes anyway because for some reason that's just the social paradigm. We're just like, all right, I guess. But then you get there and you're already mad. You know what I mean? You're like, they better not ask me to carry anything big. They better not. And I only have an hour. And they better know that. And they better love me. And they better have pizza ready because this is ridiculous. This is my day off. They know that. And, of course, it's your day off because why would they ask you to come on your day that you work? You know what I mean? But you're, like, already mad. You don't want to do it. You could have said no. You didn't say no. You show up. You have that same kind of idea. They better love me for whatever it is I give them. If I spend 20 minutes and carry one box, you owe me. This is big. Because nobody wants to move. Moving is terrible. It's terrible. It is. We could just say no. But see, that's the same kind of concept. It's the same sort of heart that Cain had. God's going to take whatever I bring him. God doesn't care. God does care. He does care. You know why he cares? He deserves nothing less than the very best worship you can possibly bring. He doesn't have to do anything to deserve it. He's already done enough to deserve literally the best that you can come up with and more. You should be in the lab, with the drawing board. How can I worship him better already without more? We don't need more. We're already there. It's kind of like, what we read in Revelations where it talks about the lukewarm Christian. Revelations 3:15 and 16 in the New King James. I know your works, that you are neither cold nor hot. I could wish you were cold or hot. So then because you are lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I will vomit you out of my mouth. God would rather you didn't believe in him at all than you say, I believe in you, and bring nonsense worship. Empty lip service worship. He would rather you literally not believe in him at all. Isn't that a powerful statement? And this is God. He loves you. He wants you to go to heaven, but he would rather you just not believe than bring this. It's offensive is what it is. It's offensive to him. Lip service worship is offensive to God. And that's exactly how the enemy wins, is by getting you in that place, in that lukewarm place as a Christian. A couple years ago, our own Pastor Floyd here preached a message here that I loved. And in that message, what he said was, the devil doesn't want you to leave hell. He doesn't want you to get yourself out. And that's obviously true. But if you should so happen to find your way out, if you should so happen to find Jesus and be saved from hell, then he'll settle for you just being quiet. He doesn't want you to tell other people the way out. He wants you to be quiet. And that's exactly the point of lukewarm, unprepared worship. The unprepared worshiper, the lukewarm worshiper, is not telling other people the way out. They're just happy to be out, or at least thinking that they're out. They sit, they wait. I got that afterlife thing taken care of. Check, done. Okay, what's on TV? You know what I'm saying? We can't be like that. God deserves more. If we're going to be Christians, if we're going to call ourselves Christians, then we need to live the life of a Christian. Jesus Christ said himself, what I think is hilarious, I think Jesus was really funny. He said, "Why do you even call me Lord if you're not going to do what I say? Why waste the time? Why even say the words? If you're not going to listen, why even call me Lord? Why call me anything?" And the fact is, if anybody ever had the right to tell you who you were, if anybody ever had the ability to truly tell you who you weren't, what you could do, what you couldn't do, what you should do, it could only be God. There's nobody else you've ever met that really has the ability to say anything like that to you. That's why we don't listen when people tell us stuff. Even people that we respect. You're a smart person. I'm not going to listen to a thing you say. I accept that you're smarter than me. That's cool. But you just be smart over there, do your math or whatever you're doing. I'm going to just do me. And that's what we act like. But God, you can't argue with God. When God says don't do this, the thing is, it's not even a matter of him just being of authority over you. The stuff that he tells you to do and not to do, it's really for you. When you really look into the things that you're asked to do, not to do with your life, with your body, with your money, with your resources, it's for you. It's for you and for the people around you. It's not just because God wants to see if you'll do it. This will be fun. Let's see, watch. We'll get him to do a trick. I bet I can get him to jump through a hoop. Watch, everybody. Did it. See that? It's not like that. He's got much more important things to do. This is God. Remember? As I said, we plan because we want to succeed. And again, we're talking about God. We talk about God all the time. Sometimes you talk so much about God that you kind of get desensitized to what God is. You know what I mean? Like when you watch certain shows or movies or read certain kind of books and you're overexposed to something, and so somebody next to you sees it and they're like, ugh, and you're like, you don't even notice it. You get desensitized. You can get desensitized to God. We forget all the wonderful things that he does. Just the character of him. I was reading in Job, and I don't remember. I didn't write down exactly where it was, but there's this really funny part. Job is complaining. He's had a hard time. It's not beyond understanding that he's complaining, but he's had a hard time. But he's complaining, and God's like, he gives him this whole, refrain. He's like, I'm sorry, how big's the earth again? You should know, right? You were there. Could you tell me what's the exact measure of it? How was the foundation laid? You should know. I mean, you know everything, right, Job? You got this. What was it again? Could you recall? I don't remember. It's just like on and on and on, and I'm sure that Job is just like red-faced, staring at the floor like, sorry, God, and I was just kind of feeling down, and he's like, mm-hmm. But this is God who put the stars in the sky and calls them by name. What kind of a thing is that to say? We hear all the time on the news how there is beyond count stars in the sky. There's a million, billion, zillion, cajillion galaxies. And each one of those has a million, billion, zillion stars. He knows them by name. I mean, it's beyond comprehension. This is the kind of stuff he does. This is the kind of stuff he does that's not even like his main stuff. That's just like, oh yeah, there's stars. You like those? Sure. Let's have some more. It's no big deal. They're just stars. I'm just God. No big deal. No big deal. Right? He says he rolled the heavens out like a scroll. This is just amazing. The words that are used just to help you understand. I'm sure the reality of it was insane. If you could see it, I'm sure it was just ridiculous to look at. But this is just so you can understand. I rolled it out like a scroll. Again, no big deal. Just God. I do this all day, I made you. You get a life. You get a life. But that's how amazing he is. But we get desensitized to that idea. And we're like, oh, it's just God. Oh, it's just God? Can't be like that. So as a contrast to our Cain and Abel story, I want to tell you about a perfect story of worship, of preparation for worship, what prepared worship looks like. And obviously, the only person that we can look to for that is Jesus. Like I said before, Jesus is a funny guy. He had a funny life. When you read through the Gospels, he seemed like a handful, I would say. You know what I mean? He kind of had this thing on a couple of occasions. He would wander off. He'd kind of run off. Or at least from the point of view of his family, he'd be gone. They're like, where's he at? One time in particular, I'm going to tell you about two, but the first one here, he was, I think he was 12. His family's on like a vacation, not a vacation. They're on a trip. He's 12. He's gone. They can't find him. They're looking for him all over the place. When they finally find him, he's in the temple. He's teaching. And they're like, Jesus, where have you been? We've been looking for you all day. Any normal mom probably has her sandal off. She's like, no, not today, Jesus, not today. We're on a trip. We're in a city. I don't even know where we are right now. And you're just wandering off? And this is Jesus' answer. This is how funny Jesus is. Why were you looking for me? Didn't you know where I'd be? Didn't you know I'd be in my Father's house? One translation that I think is really funny, I think it's NIV, it says, didn't you know I'd be about my Father's business? And it's kind of like she's standing there and we've been looking for you all day, and the first thing you say to me is, why were you looking for me? And then the other sandal comes off. I'm going to get you with both. But that's the kind of stuff he did. It was like, you know where I was. Where am I always? What am I always doing? Because this is Jesus. The same kind of thing happens a little bit later in his life. He's an adult at this point. I always kind of think it's funny because, Mary, I think, had a greater understanding than a lot of people about who Jesus was supposed to be. When you read through the Gospels, you notice that people understand that he's somebody important, but nobody really has the full picture until much later on. And she was told by the angel kind of who Jesus was. But regardless of what she knew about who he was supposed to be, she was still his mother. And so she was still worried. Jesus would wander off and she's like, I wonder if he's eating all right. I told him to pack that warm tunic. It's really chilly, and I just hope he's taking care of himself. He can't just be out there, Jesus, all the time, praying, not eating, stuff like that. That's what Jesus would do. He'd be out there praying and blessing people, and he'd be doing this work. He'd be about his Father's business. Like he said, he wouldn't eat. He wouldn't sleep. The most important thing was his Father's business. And in a situation just like this, his family goes looking for him again. His mother goes to get him because, in all likelihood, she probably just wants to bring him home, give him a sandwich, put him to bed, let him sleep, let him eat, something like that. Jesus is off teaching in a house, and it's Jesus live, so it's sold out seating. House is full. Outside the house, also full. There's a crowd. When Jesus' family, mother and brothers, arrive on the scene there, they can't get to see Jesus. He's too far away. They have to pass messages through the crowd. Tell Jesus that his mother and his brothers are here, that we're outside. We've come to get him. Goes through the crowd all the way up to Jesus, and Jesus finally, somebody tells him, hey, your mother and your brothers, they're here. They're here to get you. And Jesus' response, again, a little bit cheeky. My mother and my brothers, he says. Who are my mother and brothers? My mother and brothers are those who do the will of my Father in heaven. This, by the way, is Matthew 46:50. I can actually just read it to you because I did put Riley through the trouble of putting it on the screen probably. So I'll read it for you just so you. This is Matthew 12:46. While he was still talking to the crowd, it happens that his mother and brothers stood outside asking to speak to him. Someone said to him, "Look, your mother and your brothers are standing outside asking to speak with you." But Jesus replied to the one who told him, "Who is my mother and brothers?" And stretching out his hand toward his disciples and all of his followers, he said, "Here are my mother and brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father who is in heaven by believing in me and following me is my mother and brother and sister." In Romans chapter 12, verse 1, it says, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing. This is your true and proper worship." Beyond making an offering, this compels us to be the offering. This story about Jesus that might at first kind of strike you as being a little bit rude. His mother came looking for him. He was like, "I'm busy," you know. But what it is this. Jesus understood that proper worship meant that God had to be here. It was above his hunger, above his aching knees. It was above his being tired. It was above his mother, his brothers, his family ties. It was above all other things. Everything else had to be second, no matter what it was, even his mother. And she wasn't there to do something bad, but what she was there to do was interrupt his worship. That was his act of worship. Being about his Father's business was his act of worship. And even though she had good intentions, he knew that that had to take a back seat because what he was doing was more important. I don't know how long I've spoken so far, so just give me a nod or do the hook. You know what I mean? Like, yank. Another concept that we came across during this series that was actually pretty cool. It's kind of like one of those things where you think about something a lot. You may read something a lot, and you don't always look at it a certain way. That's one of the reasons I like reading. When I do a Bible study, I have probably 10 different translations open. It's like the difference of just one word can really open up your mind to something. It just has to do with, I guess, the vocabulary that you're used to. When you have a solid understanding of what it says in a word-for-word translation, sometimes even the Message, which is like a thought for thought, I think that one's really kind of funny. It's kind of blunt. I like that one a little bit. I've been reading that a lot. But this idea that was brought up earlier, the idea that when God shows up somewhere, that place becomes hallowed ground. Even a mundane place. No matter what happened in that place before or what will happen tomorrow, while God is there, it's hallowed ground right now. And so that means that even you can be hallowed ground. The person sitting next to you can be hallowed ground. You can be in a room like this where we're all in the Spirit of God, we're all worshiping God, and everything in this room is God. He's here in the atmosphere. He's here in the hearts and the minds of everybody in the room. God inhabits the praise of his people. We're here singing. He's here. And everything you do in an atmosphere like that is an interaction with God himself. That's something to be prepared for. When we look back at our Ecclesiastes 5 that we started with, just some points that come out of that: guarding your steps and focus on what you're doing as you go into the house of God. How about considering the idea that when I speak to you, when you speak to me, when I speak to any of you, all of these vessels are a house of God. guarding your steps, paying attention to what you're doing, taking care, being respectful. It's not just when you're in the sanctuary. Every person you meet is a child of God. And even though they may not believe, his stamp is on them. To treat them in a manner that, it happens, that. It does. It's unfortunate, but it does. Sometimes we are defensive around people who don't believe. It's like we're being attacked by them, or we feel that way. We feel insecure. We don't understand why they don't believe in God, but sometimes we treat them in a manner unbefitting of a child of God. Don't be hasty with your mouth or speak careless words or vows. When you make a vow or pledge to God, don't put it off. Do not allow your speech to cause you to sin. In the Bible, there's a verse, I don't know where it is, but it says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Just be honest. Sometimes the answer is no. You can't please everybody all the time, but you shouldn't be dishonest about it. Like it says here, don't let your speech cause you to be a sinner, especially when you're talking to God. How many movies, or maybe even you've had this experience? God, if you just get me through this, I'll be the next Billy Graham. I promise. You can't make that promise. It's ridiculous to try. And he's like, no, you won't. And I know that. You know how I know? Go on, ask me. Ask me how I know. I'm God. I know who you are. I know you're not going to do this, and I know that, I just find it great. I find this whole series so great. I'm really honored to be here, too, speaking alongside people like Pastor Floyd and Pastor Lori and the future Pastor Gabe, who's not even here. I am saying, put that on the recording. Send it to him. Absentee Gabe. Managing the movie theater, probably. This past week, like I said, God was really good to me. He put a lot of interesting things into my week. Some challenges and some really cool experiences and some great victories. And I had this opportunity this last week. I met a guy on the internet. He was from West Bengal, India. And apparently in this place, it's a very high concentration of Muslims. And this young man had converted. He'd chosen to become a Christian. But he was terrified. Terrified. Because, and this is, I want to tell you exactly what he said, because the way he said it, and it was kind of funny because he didn't speak English very well, which is fine. He was from another country. I forgave him for that. But he made, in the middle of these kind of broken conversation, this one very clear statement. And it's pretty weighty and pretty heartbreaking. Let me read it to you here. When I tell my family, I will lose my home. When I tell my family, they will become my forever enemies. That was his exact words. My forever enemies. How's that for preparation to worship? His preparation to worship was saying, the very last words I'm ever going to speak to my family is I believe in Jesus Christ. And that's it. Your life is over now. It may be physically over, because he goes on to say that his life will be in danger. Not just his family, his whole life. Two scriptures came to my mind. Matthew chapter 10, 35 and 36. For I came to set a man against his father, and a daughter against his mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's enemies will be the members of his own household. That's the kind of thing that you have to consider when it comes to this. This is what preparation to worship is really like. Not every decision you make to worship, not every preparation will be that deep. But if it gets that deep, where will you be? Where's your heart at in that? Think about that. Next one was Luke 14:28-30. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it, lest after he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish it, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. When I talked to this guy in India, that's exactly where he was. He was counting the cost. He had already made the decision to be a Christian, but he hadn't told anybody yet. Because like he said, he knows that as soon as he makes that statement, everything pops off at that point. That's when everything changes. That's when the real decisions happen. That's when what he's saying is no longer an abstract concept. It's no longer his personal belief. Now it's his entire life affected by that. See, God isn't just worth something. He's worth everything. Everything. And this young man understood that. As scared as he was, he understood that it was worth losing everything he knew to follow Jesus. My papers are stuck together. I wrote a small novel for this. I think I made too many notes. I think Pastor Laurie was like, about 6 pages. Mine's like 15. I think I wrote down literally everything that crossed my mind. Why is God worth everything? We say a lot about how God loves us. We say it all the time. We have t-shirts and posters and little stickers on Facebook. But what does that really mean? Do we ever think about what that love really looks like? This is something that I've said to a few people. Some of you may have heard me say this before. It's kind of a speech I've grown accustomed to giving because it's just really good. It's one of the deepest revelations I think God's ever given me. And it's simple. That's what I think is fun about it. You know, when you read these big, weighty chapters in the Bible and you're like, yeah, that's good. You ever read a sentence and go, ooh, that was better? Just a sentence. This sentence that I'm talking about is in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 4. For he chose us in him before the creation of the world to be holy and blameless in his sight, in love. So we know that in Genesis 1:1 it says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. But in Ephesians 1:4 it's saying before that, God made you. See, sometimes I think we get this idea that how can God love me? How can it be true? I've messed up so much. How can he still be okay with me? Really? No, I'm terrible. I don't love me. How could God love me? But I believe very sincerely that it's this idea of the order of things that gets us on that track. We kind of have this idea that God created the heavens and the earth, and just like the Genesis account, on the 6th day he made man. But realistically, according to the Ephesians here, he may have created man on the 6th day, but he already had that set up. He already had individuals created. He already had a life planned for you. And as it even says here, to be holy and blameless in his sight in love. To me, that's like he already knew, even through Jesus and the cross, that no matter what, you know, some preachers sometimes say, you know, anything you've ever done, Jesus knew about it 2,000 years ago, and he died for you anyway. God knew about it well before that, before the foundation of the earth, before there was an earth. Okay, God didn't make you to fill the space. He didn't make you so there was something to live on earth. He made the earth so there was a place to put you. A.W. Tozer said this, "Sometimes I go to God and I say, God, if thou never answers another prayer while I live on this earth, I will still worship thee as long as I live, in the ages to come even. What thou hast done for me is amazing. God put me so far in debt that if I were to live 1,000,000 millennia, I could not pay him for what he's done for me." This is just how I visualize it. I know that this is, again, like we spoke about earlier, God rolling out the heavens like a scroll, just being a way for us to understand it in human terms. I'm sure the reality, again, was just insane. You couldn't understand it. But this is how I see it. I draw and paint and stuff like that, so this is how I see it. I'm kind of crazy about it too. Can you just imagine God out there sitting at his desk? There's like colored pencils and pens and stuff all over the place, paintbrushes, paints, clay, all kinds of stuff, notebooks. He's taking notes, he's drawing pictures, he's designing you before the foundation of the earth. He's designing you, and the way God designs stuff is not how we design stuff. He doesn't pick pieces based on what's available. He doesn't have to choose what the best of the options are. He's God. In Latin, there's a term, it's ex nihilo. It means from nothing. He can make from nothing precisely what he intends to make. It's not like I like this one because it's better than this one. It's precisely what he wanted. He put this idea together for you that he was so excited about, he couldn't just let that go. He couldn't just file that away, hang it on the wall. It wasn't good enough. He had to have you. He had to have you. So he created reality. He created the universe to have a place to put the earth, to have a place to put your feet, so that you'd have a place to be, because he couldn't have it any other way. When we say, how can God love me? That's why. He loved you before you ever made your first mistake, to the point where he had to create reality so you'd have a place to exist. That's the kind of love. That's why we prepare to worship a God like that. Because he deserves nothing less than our worship. Like A.W. Tozer said, if he never does another thing for you, he's already says he's in debt for 1,000,000 millennia. That's like 1 billion years. 1 billion years. He could still never pay him back in all that time. And that's the truth. We can't even understand the things that God has done for us. And he does it, like I said, just like he did the stars. No big deal. I love you. It's cool. Don't worry about it. I got this. I want you. I want you to be with me. I want you to worship me. Why? Because when you worship God, when you connect with God, that's power. That's power. People that don't even believe in God can see that on you. They can tell. When you've been in the presence of the King, people can tell. They can smell it. They can feel it. There's something about you. There's something about you. They can feel that. You don't got to impress people or win them over. You walk through the door, and God goes before you. And by the time you show up, they've already been won over for you. You're still down the street, and they're already like, somebody's coming. And he's going to be amazing. I can just tell. Do you feel that? I feel that. That feels good. That's the kind of God that we serve. That's why we prepare for worship. And again, we prepare, and this is my closing here, so it feels weird because I'm usually in the band. So to be like, worship team, come. And I'm conditioned, but not this time. Touching on a couple of the things that I've said before. Who could deserve our worship? We look back at Romans, where it says, you as a living sacrifice is true worship. Paul reinforces that idea multiple times when he talks about dying to yourself daily, right? Giving up you and putting God first, like Jesus did, like this young man in India is in the process of doing, really, putting God above. It's not always an easy thing to prepare for, but it's always something that's worth preparing for. We prepare because we insist upon a positive outcome. We won't just let it be whatever. We don't show up at the throne room of God with any old thing and expect him to accept it as worship. He's worthy of our worship. He's worthy of 150% of what you have to give. Because you're always in debt. No matter how much you give, there's always more. You should always look to there being more to give, because he deserves that. It's not a matter of paying him. It's just what he deserves. It's just what's right. Because of how much he loves us. Because of the things he's done for us. Out of nothing. Because he loved you. Now, I personally feel that it's important to be a church family. Jesus did a lot to make sure that we had this body, this group, this connection with one another. So if we could all stand, please, I'd like to just join together in some prayer. You can hold hands if you like, and however you feel comfortable. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the things that we can't even understand. The things that you've done for us that we literally just can never understand. You love us in a way that boggles our minds, so much so that we don't even believe it sometimes. When there's really nothing more true than your love for us. It's like the foundation of creation is that you loved us that much. Just the idea of us. We're so grateful to you, Lord God. So grateful to you. We thank you for your love. We thank you for your Son. We thank you for the cross. We thank you for your forgiveness. No matter how many times we go astray, Father, we thank you for your patience. Anybody here has a need, I'd like to ask the prayer team to come up. In this place, in this body, it's important for us to be open with each other. So if anybody has a need, please come up and pray. But if you're not going to come up, I ask you just pray together with yourselves, with your neighbor. Just love on each other. Just be that body of Christ.
Amen. Good word. Thank you, Eli. I told you that's how it goes at Starbucks.